Hello everyone, welcome to the demo section of AWS services. Today we're going to show how to sign up for AWS service and start using it. So I just opened the browser and then I just googled AWS sign up, and then you'll come across this link called portal awsamazon.com/billing sign up. So when you click that, it will ask you for your email address. I'm not going to complete the account because I already have an account, but I just want to demonstrate for the purpose of this account. So it asks you for a strong password, and if you need to come up with a password, the one place that I normally use is just Google random password generator. And when you go to that website, you can leave the you can change the strength of the password, and then when you hit the generate password, it generates a very strong password for you. And you may obviously want to save it somewhere, but I'm just going to choose one of those password that's generated by the random password. Again, like I said, I'm not going to create this account. I already have an I'm not going to create this account. I already have an account. But I'm just going to name it test AWS class, test AWS or something, and continue the process. Once that's done, it's going to ask you whether it's a professional account or personal account. You can look at the help screen, and you can, if it's a personal account, obviously it's just going to prompt you for your phone number. You complete this process, and then it will ask you for your credit card information. You complete that process, and then at that point your account is essentially set up. Now, like I said, I'm not going to complete this process since I already have it. And once the account is completed, you'll get a link to this, but in case you don't, it's just if you go to aws.amazon.com, that's the link that you want to go to. So what I want to do is I want to go to AWS console, enter my email address that I have for this account, and then complete the login process there. So I just want to take a few minutes and demonstrate some of the most important factors of this website. There are lots of services in Amazon Web Services. And it kind of seems very overwhelming when you start using Amazon console. What we just want to do is we want to take a few minutes and explain to you the major services that are going to be focusing in this module, in this course. And what Amazon has done is they've done a good job of segregating that or compartmentalizing these services. So for compute services, they have EC2, Lightsail, ECS, and we are not going to cover a lot of these services, but at least it shows, okay, if you want to look at a compute service, this is the category that you're going to look at. The management and monitoring services, the mobile hub services, if you're developing mobile applications, they have very good audio, augmented reality and virtual reality services here. Media services, if you want to transcode videos, if you want to stream videos, there's a lot of services around that. And storage is something that we're going to focus extensively in the coming modules, specifically S3, a little bit of Glacier, storage gateway. Database is a major component that we're going to touch, specifically RDS. They have NoSQL databases, they have Elasticache, there's tons of databases that they have. And then migration services, if you want to migrate your data or you want to migrate your applications, they'll tell you how to, what are the services there around those components. We're going to spend a lot of time in networking section, VPCs, which is the virtual private cloud, CloudFront, Route 53. Those are our core networking services. They have a lot of DevOps kind of tools, the code commit, code deploy. There's a big IoT services. Again, as you can see, it's very well organized according to the categories that we want. But let's say if you don't know the name of the service, or if you cannot find it, you can always go back to this search service and just type in the name of the service. Let's say I'm looking for RDS or relational database service. I can just type in the search window, and then you can go to this RDS dashboard. But let's go back to the main service. I just want to show you a couple of things about more of the services. This is the main console. So if you at any point you want to look at the other services, you can click this services link, and then it shows you the main dashboard that we saw earlier. And then when you're done looking at the service, you can either close it or you can click on that particular service to get to the dashboard. So again, if you're done looking at it, you can just close it to keep it go away. The other thing I do, some people like to do is they click on services, and since they don't know the categories, some people like to categorize by sort by alphabetical order. So if you click on that AZ, all the services that they have is sorted by alphabet. So you can do that way as well. I like to keep it in the group way, so it's the default section, so I can use that one. And the other thing Amazon does is they'll keep the recently used services on the history side on the left hand menu, so you can always click that one. The other thing I tell people is, let's say you're working on few services on a regular basis and you don't want to keep looking for it every day. So you can look at these services and then select it. The other way of remembering is you can click on this icon here, and let's say you work on code pipeline on a regular basis, you can just drag and drop it here. You can do as much as your monitor allows it. Right now, let's say I work on these two common services on a regular basis, I would just drag those services here. At the very least, I suggest you drag EC2 there, because that's a common service. We're going to use it on a very regular basis. So let's go ahead and close this, and then I can click on this EC2 dashboard, because that's the majority of the time we're going to spend time on. There are a lot of services here. We'll cover about those in a few minutes. But what I want to show, or let's say you want to find out what IAM does, you can come in here and type IAM. We can come in and type in IAM, and it tells you you can use IAM service to manage users' keys and their encryption keys. And again, Amazon tries to help you as much as they can to use all these services. Again, the one takeaway from this section is, don't get overwhelmed with the number of services that you see. Again, we're not going to cover all the services in this course. We're just going to scratch the surface. We think we probably cover about 10 to 12 services throughout the course, but we want to give a flavor of, we don't want to give an introduction to some of the services, so it's easy to pick up the rest of the services. Let's go and close this one and open the EC2 dashboard. If you don't have it, you can click the shortcut if you have it created here, or you can go back and look for EC2. Again, you can always keep looking at the history tab. If you have recently opened a service, AWS remembers it. So click the EC2, and this is the primary dashboard minutes ago. So if you go to the RDS, this is the RDS dashboard. RDS again stands for Relational Database Service. So this lets you create and this lets you create multiple and this lets you create databases, different flavors of databases. So they have Amazon Aurora, which is their own version. This is something that they wrote from the ground up. They have MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, and SQL Server. So again, this is the RDS dashboard. So we'll have a complete module on this one, but I just wanted to show you every service in Amazon console has its own dashboard. So what I want to do is spend a couple of minutes on the EC2, because this is the focus of this module, and go a little bit details on what this dashboard looks like, or what we should expect here. The main thing that you'll be spending time is on the instances. This is where you spin up your EC2 instances. It will tell you how many instances you have running, how many dedicated hosts that you have, how many disk volumes or EBS volumes that you are using currently. We haven't done the EBS section yet. That is next module. But this just wanted to show you all the services that are related or tied to EC2. So some of the spot instances, reserved instances, if you have it, can be all accessed here. Your AMIs that you have, obviously if you have any private AMIs, they'll be listed here. The volumes that you created, any backups that you have. Again, once we start populating our services, we'll start listing them here. The main other section that we'll spending time in the networking section is the load balancer section. Load balancer has like a mini dashboard in itself. So if you click on the load balancer section and hit the load balancer, then there are 3 types of load balancers that they have. They have ALB, application load balancer, which is the newer version of the load balancer, the network load balancers or that operates at the network layer, and then the classic, it's also called an ELB, elastic load balancer. This is where we'll be spending some time in the networking section. Even though ALB is the recommended approach going forward, ELB is a little easy to explain, and it's a lot more simplistic than application load balancer. So we'll be focusing some time on the elastic load balancer. Again, back to the EC2 dashboard. We also have auto scaling here, which we'll cover in the next couple of modules. So they have launch configuration, they have auto scaling groups. So again, we'll cover those. I just want to give you a brief introduction to this dashboard. Your elastic IPs, security groups, those are the main sections that we'll be dealing with in this section. So you might see this warning pop up. Amazon had, initially they used to have a 8-character for their network IDs and instance IDs, and now they're expanding it to 17 characters because there's so many people are using it. They're running out of the hexadecimal number that they use for identifying networks and volumes. So if you spin up an EC2 instance, we'll just create an EC2 instance quickly. You will see the instance ID is this longer format version. So let's go take a step back. So to create an instance, you'll click on this instances tab, and then you can click on this launch instance. And this is the AMIs that you have access to. These are either the public AMIs or something that you can these are the public AMIs that you can use. If you have your own private AMIs that you created, which will be part of this module, they'll be listed here. Amazon Marketplace AMIs, these are the AMIs that companies are selling it. So if you want, you can purchase it. Like for instance, if you have a Juniper firewall, you can acquire this. So the Juniper firewall, the cost for that firewall is in addition to the EC2 instance cost itself. So for instance, they're going to charge 55 cents an hour, or around $2,280 on top of the EC2 cost. So that's something, if you want to use it, it's available for you. And community AMIs are typically third-party AMIs, people who write their own AMIs and then put it on for everybody else to use. But most of the time, I stick with the quick start. For this lab, we are going to use the Amazon Linux AMI, which is based on CentOS or CentOS, as some people call it. The good thing about Amazon Linux is it comes preloaded with a lot of these tools and CLIs and packages that we normally rely on as cloud architects. So it's very, very popular operating system. But if you want, you can still obviously go with Ubuntu or Red Hat or CentOS, or obviously Windows services as well. So let me start Amazon Linux let's start an Amazon Linux instance. So so you can get a T2 Micro is the default, and if your account is a brand new account, you can get a free tier account. So that means you are not going to pay for that server for 1 year. So if you want different instance sizes, you can scroll down and get larger instances. And again, the cost obviously is going to vary. It varies by the CPUs, the number of the amount of memory, and the amount of free disk that comes with that one. So obviously this is a very, very powerful server. The networking is 25 gigabyte, so 25 gigabit, sorry. Again, so you can choose the instance, and then the other thing I like to look at is the network performance, or what kind of performance you can expect from this instance type. So for instance, if you choose a T2 Micro, you can expect low to moderate network performance, and obviously as you grow higher, you're paying for you're getting a better throughput. But for our purposes, a T2 Micro is sufficient. And the other thing is it also shows only the current generation of the servers. If you want to look at the previous generation, you can pull the you can go to this option, look at all the previous generation, and then you might see some of the older let's say for example those M1, M2s, these are the older generation. M4 are the later newer generation. So if you just want to look at the current generation, you won't see those M3s listed here. Again, so this is the T2 Micro. I'm going to click next, and this is the details about the instance itself. Where do you want to start the instance? Like right now we just have one VPC, so I'm going to leave it there. Which subnet you can within that VPC you can choose a particular data center or availability zone that you want this instance in. So I'm just going to leave it default for now. And do you want a public IP for this servers? Yes, so we just want to get the public IP, and that's the default for that subnet, so we're just going to leave it there. We're going to talk about IAM role a little later, and then rest of the stuff you can leave it blank. One thing that you do want to keep in mind for some of, as you start working as a cloud architect, is this user data section. So this is you can have the instance run a particular command or shell script or any kind of program. Let's say you want to copy files from an S3 bucket or some others you want to install or create a user or do something with the instance as the instance is coming up. You can put a shell script, or typically shell script, but you can have it run a script here, and then it will be run when the instance comes up. So we're going to leave it later. I think we have a lab coming up for that as well. And then I'm going to go to the next, add storage. So by default it's an 8 gigabytes of disk for your operating system, and you can choose the volume type. By default they recommend an SSD, general purpose disk. That's what the GP2 stands for. And the IOPS that you can expect from the disk, and it's not encrypted. If you want additional disks, you can click the add volume. This is obviously EBS type. You can change the disk device that's going to appear on the instance. So if you want to appear it as SDF, you can leave it the SDF, or you can just leave it to SDB. If you want that snapshot, if you have a backup in a snapshot, which we're going to talk about later in the next module rather, if you have an already existing snapshot, you can type it here, and then that data will be copied over to the disk. But if you don't type the snapshot here, it will be a blank disk, which is okay for us. And then you can choose the disk size. So if right now I'm just going to say I want a 10 gigabyte disk, and the volume type that you want, you can do GP2. You can do the magnetic disks, the older disk, which is not recommended right now, and there are a couple of other newer types, throughput optimized hardware hard disk, but for majority of the purposes I just leave it at SSD2. Again, I get 100 IOPS, 3 IOPS per gigabyte, so that's the IOPS I'll get. So I'm just gonna, for majority of the purposes, I'm just gonna leave it GP2. And if you want now, you can have an option of encrypting the disk, right? So if you right now it's not encrypted, you can choose to get it encrypted. We'll talk about encryption in the next class. But typically the first disk that you're seeing, the root disk, gets deleted when the instance gets deleted. So obviously you don't need the operating system if you don't have an instance. But the additional disk, this could be your data disk. So Amazon gives you an option of saving the disk. So you can if you don't want the data to be saved as well, you can choose to delete on termination. Again, be careful what that flag that you set, because right now this setting, because I enable the delete on termination flag, if I terminate that server, this disk will also be deleted by Amazon. But for instance, if you want to store the data, you want to leave it unchecked. And then comes the tag. So I'm just going to add a tag. You can add up to 50 tags. It used to be 10. I think last year they increased it to 50 tags. So I'm just going to say my first instance. You can type anything you want. It's not for Amazon. It's just for your purposes. If you just want to identify whose instance it is. Typically, when we do in our regular work, we just give it the name of the project. You can add another one for who the owner is, anything that you can think of, right? Billing code, whatever your application or your company wants, you can keep on adding tags. And these tags are used extensively by a lot of applications, right? So if you want to generate a report that figures out, okay, how much instances is this project using, so the best way of doing that is through tags. Again, we'll talk about, we already talked about tags, but you can, like I said, you can add up to 50 tags for this one. So you can, right now I'm not going to use the tags, I'm just going to use one tag, the name of the instance. And the security group is the main, very important concept we talked in the class. So it's essentially saying, who can access this instance and on which port. By default, Amazon will start creating those security groups with Launch Wizard 1 and so on and so forth. I just want to name it my own, so I just call it MySG or something easy to remember. I typically call it the name of the project, and then right now the SSH service listening on port 22, that's the default port, is open for everyone. So what I typically like to do is come and say my IP only, or if you have a particular IP address that you want to restrict access to, you can just type the IP address here. And then this is a very frequently requested feature from Amazon. There was no option to add a notes here. So in case if you have, let's say, this is Joe's home address, home IP, so we can just keep on adding here. So and you can keep on adding more roles. So what we typically do is for the administrators, we can keep on adding one for each IP. So in case you just have, let's say 1.2.34.32, so obviously you have to type the right IP address. So you can type in, you can type in Dave's home IP or whatever. So it just keeps the note section or the description section is something easy for you to remember who has access or why the access was created. Again, I don't need this one, so I'm just going to delete that second SSH rule. And obviously you can have as many rules, and obviously you want to add, if it's a database, you want to add database ports, or if it's a application server, if it's a web service, we're going to add port 80 and so on and so forth. The final page is review the selections that you made. At any point you can click on the instance types, the security groups, or you can change any of the details that you selected. You can look at all the details that you selected. Again, we selected one root volume for the operating system itself, the first disk, and the data disk is going to be presented as /dev/stb to the host, and it's a 10 gigabyte disk right now. And then you're going to launch it. So right now I don't have a and then it's going to prompt for a key pair, what SSH key pair are going to use. So right now it didn't find any key pairs, so I'm just going to say create a new key pair, and my test key pair, or whatever you want to call it. I usually call it and this is my way of naming it. I just call it US East 1, and then the account number. So account name, if it's my customer account, so I'll just name the name of the customer, and then I just call it key pair or something. So it's easy for me because I work with several customers. It's easy for me to remember. I just put it all in one directory on my home directory, so it's easy to remember which customer that key pair belongs to. And then this is like I mentioned in the class, this is the only time they let you download the key pair. So you download the key pair to your laptop, and then you hit launch instance. So this takes a couple of minutes to complete the launch, but as you can see, the instance ID is that long 17-digit hexadecimal number that we mentioned. So you can click on that, and it shows you the details of that instance. And as you can see, the status is still initializing. It takes a couple of minutes depending on depending on what the instance size that you selected, how much if you're asked to back up from and it depends on several factors, but typically it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to complete this process. You can see all the details that we selected, the name of the security group we selected, and you can look at the security, which ports are open. If you just want to look at at high level, if you want to make any changes, you can click on the security group and it takes you to the security group section that we had earlier. It tells you right now SSH is allowed, inbound SSH is allowed, and outbound everything is allowed. So let's go back to the instance. It's initializing right now. It runs the status check in a minute to make sure it's all healthy. And then that's the name of the key pair that you selected, the disks that you allocated. The XVDA is the first disk, the root disk, that's where the operating system lives, and SDB is that second disk that we created, that we provisioned. Let's see. We're going to talk about source destination check in the next in the networking section. It will tell you which VPC the instance was created, which subnet the instance was created, and the public IP, which is what we're going to need if you need to access that instance. So it assigned the IP address, or you can use this public DNS name, or whichever we want to use it. So I'm not going to SSH to the instance, but I just wanted to show you how the instance is created and how we can check it. There's a couple of labs coming up. Again, the instance check has not been completed yet. So the monitoring is another section that we'll talk briefly during the course. But you can look at metrics like how busy your CPU is, what your disk performance looks like at the moment, how many reads, writes, operations are happening, the networking, how much packets was received, how many packets were out, did the status check fail, and so on and so forth. And the tags that you created when the instance was started. You can obviously add more tags here, and then continue adding tags like we did during the instance creation. Thing I wanted to discuss about the AWS console. Again, we're going to spend a lot of time in the AWS console. But one thing that we should remind is AWS console happens to be the most popular way of accessing AWS service, especially as you're a beginner. But that's not the only way to access AWS service. There's ways of CLI, command line interface. There's AWS API, and there are a lot of third-party tools that you can use to access AWS services. But for the majority of the purpose, about 99% of the time, we start with AWS services, because that's where most of the work that we're doing for this coursework ends up with. And the one thing that I forgot to tell you earlier was this is the region that we are operating it. Northern Virginia is the US East, and US East 2 is the Ohio region. There is California, Oregon, and so on and so forth. Depending on when your account was created, my account is pretty old. Depending on when your account is created, Northern Virginia may not be your default region, because the US East 1 is a very busy region. So Amazon encourages people to go to Oregon or Ohio right now. So don't be surprised if you don't see Northern Virginia here, which is okay. All the regions behave exactly the same. So it just happens to that. So don't be surprised if you see other region. Obviously, you want to start the services where your customers are. So let's say you are developing an application and your majority of the customers are in the Australian region. So you want to start the services in the Sydney region, obviously. The other thing you might run into is the limits. So this is the default limits that Amazon provides. And then depending on the instance size, there's a limit of how many instances you can start. So for instance, the C518X large, and obviously a very huge instance, you can only start 2 by default. let's say you want to start 4 or 5. All you have to do is go into this request limit increase. You complete a form, you provide them justification on why you want that instance. You can talk to them or web, phone, chat, and then they will tell you, they'll 99% of the time they'll approve it. That's not a problem. But by default, they limit those services. So again, if you go to this EC2 dashboard, and then the limits is where those limits are. Again, it's not just the EC2 limits. There are a lot of other limits that Amazon imposes. How many VPCs you can have in a region, how many subnets you can create, and so on and so forth. So for majority of this, majority of these services, if you want to increase the limit, you can just click this link here, and then you can provide the justification, and then they'll be happy to increase it. There are few hard limits. For instance, the one that I ran into a couple of years ago was the number of S3 buckets you can create in an account. That limit is 100, and that's a hard limit. So you may want to be careful on how many resources you are creating. Again, the reason they do that is for your own good, right? So they don't want you to run the bill accidentally. You can look at the reports. There's a couple of reports that you can look at. The usage report, the EC2 instance report, how much is it in use. They can look at the bills. I'm just going to skip this one, so you can see what is your expected bill. Then you can previous months, you can look at what your expected bill is in this month, and so on and so forth. So those are a couple of interesting reports you can look at. And so that's all we wanted to cover in this module. Again, feel free to ask any questions. Again, it's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of the console. Again, the majority of the time you just would go to this services, and you can look at the services in alphabetical order, or you can look at by the group, which is what I like to do. Again, it's pretty obvious. If you want to do a lot of machine learning, it's all categorized with the machine learning category, and so on and so forth. And before we wrap up this section, we just want to show you how to terminate this instance. So the majority of the actions for your instance, you just have to select the instance. Right now I just have only one instance, so it's easy to select it. But let's say you'd have multiple instances, then you would come and select the instance here, and then you have an option of additional actions you can take. For instance, let's say you want to reboot that instance. You can go to the instance state and reboot that instance. If you want to take a backup of the instance, you can come in and do the create image. It will take a snapshot of the existing operating system with all the applications that you installed. It will essentially create a private AMI for you. If you want to change the security group, you can go into the networking section and add additional security groups. So right now there's MySG. So if you have additional security groups you want attached to your instance, you can do it here. You can look at the monitoring. You can enable the detailed CloudWatch monitoring. You can get more granular details about your instance if you like. The other option is you can, and finally you can look at the log itself. So if your system is this is a Unix system, you can look at the system logs to see if you are having issues with the instance. You can take a look at it. Sometimes you're unable to connect to the instance, but sometimes it helps to look at the logs to see what that instance is doing. And there is an option to connect to that instance. So if it's, since it's a Unix system, you can click here and it will tell you the commands. If you have a standalone SSH client, which we'll be exploring in this section. In the lab, you'll be using PuTTY for Windows, and if you have Linux or Mac, you can use the existing SSH client that comes with it. Or you can use a browser-based SSH client. I don't use it on a regular basis, but there is an option. For instance, it says it's Chrome is not supported, for instance. You may want to use Internet Explorer or Safari. There's an extension that comes with it. But if you're using a standalone Unix instance, you can use the command here, ssh-i. The command listed here. Obviously, it wants to you have to be in the directory where this key file or certificate is located, or key pair is located, and there are instructions on how to connect using PuTTY here as well. So I just want to now I just want to terminate that instance. So all I have to do is go to the action menu and then hit terminate. Again, you can stop it if you choose to. They're not going to charge for the instance, but you'll still be paying for that storage. So right now we have about 18 gigabytes attached to that instance. One is the root volume of 8 gigabytes, and then the block device we attached a second disk STB of 10 gigabytes. So they'll still charge you for that 18 gigabytes. Again, I am out of the free tier period, 1 year period, so they'll be charging my account. But if your account is new, your EC2 instance will itself be free. So let's go ahead and terminate that instance, and then it will ask you for confirmation, and he just hit terminate. The other one thing I wanted to show you before we wrap up is, let's say you don't want anybody to accidentally terminate this instance. You can go to instance settings and say set and change the termination protection. So when you click here, so currently it's disabled. Anybody who has access to the console would be able to disable it. So if you enable it, then you cannot accidentally terminate it. So if we want to try to terminate it, it's not going to let me terminate because it says termination protection is on, and it will not be terminated. So you cannot accidentally click this button. But if you want to force it, you can just come in and remove that termination protection. Change the termination protection. I'm going to disable it, and now I can go ahead and terminate that instance. You can go to the instance state, terminate, yes, terminate. Again, because I had selected this EC2, this EBS volume or this additional disk to be terminated when the instance gets terminated, that will also be gone. If you want to confirm, you can go to this volumes link here. Right now the instance is still terminating, so that's why you see these 2 disks listed here. It will be gone in a couple of minutes when the instance itself goes away. So as you can see, the instance is in the process of still shutting down. Once that instance is gone, these volumes will also be terminated here. Thank you. See you in the next section.